In this lesson, we'll use the techniques that we learned in the last lesson, plus adding a few new ones to those to create a slightly more complicated frame style shape for our file folder. Okay, so we're just right here where we left off with our phone, and now I want to go ahead and create that file folder shape that really just has that iconic look to it of the kind of the tab in the upper left hand corner and then the rest of the folder being round. Now I want to use that rounded rectangle look that we had before, so I'll go ahead and just kind of start to draw the shape out that I want, and I'm just using that space bar again to kind of move this around until I'm happy with the shape. And now I want to go ahead and create another shape up here at the top of the folder, and I'm just overlapping those so that I can kind of just see that a little bit better. And then I can come in here and adjust it if I feel like maybe it's a little too high. And once I'm happy with the placement of those two elements, I want to use the Pathfinder panel to unite those. So if you're just using your Essentials workspace, you're not going to have Pathfinder open. So you need to come up here to Window and come down and choose Pathfinder, and that's going to either open it up for you and just pop it up here, or if you already have it open, it will open it for you here on the side of the toolbar. So Pathfinder is going to be this little icon you see right there, and we're going to be using the Shape Mode Unite, which is the easiest one to remember what it does. It just takes two paths and it's going to unite them. So I just need to select both of those, come down here and choose Unite, and now that gives me one single path. Now I would like to be able to create a look for this file folder that is kind of like a double walled kind of effect. So we have sort of the outside look that has this frame style, and then we'll have an inner piece that's just maybe like a solid color. So to do this, it can get a little bit tricky if you're thinking, okay, I just need to draw two paths. So let me show you why. If I go ahead and select that path there and I duplicate it, I'm just going to hold down the Alt key, hit the up arrow key, then hit the down arrow key again, and you see now I have just two versions of that right on top of each other. If I hold down Shift and start to drag this down, and if I add Alt to that, it'll drag this down right to the center. You can see that even if I'm dragging towards the center, it's not going to perfectly align those paths. And if I come down here and kind of start trying to line them up by hand, you'll notice that I just have all this extra space, and the roundedness of the corner doesn't really look right either because it's the same roundedness as the outside. This one needs to be a little more pointed so that this space feels equal. So that's kind of an issue. And if I start trying to scale this to adjust it, I'm just going to show you really quickly what happens if you scale to just really extremely something with rounded corners. You can see that the rounded corner becomes really distorted here on that edge, so it doesn't really look right anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that shape, and I'm going to show you a really quick and easy way to do it. You just have to think about it a little bit differently. So once you get this shape created and you're happy with it, we're going to make this stroke the width that we want the space to be in between those two pieces. So just to kind of show you what I mean by that, this space right in between here is the width we want to make the stroke of this line. So go ahead and select that, and then we'll just come up here to stroke and start making this a little bit bigger. And I think 10 looks like a pretty good width for the space there. So now what I'm going to do is come up here to Object, go to Path, and choose Outline Stroke. So I want you to pay attention to what happens to this line whenever I choose that option. So look at the red line and where those points are. Okay, so another thing that changed just besides the placement of that line is that now instead of having that color on the stroke, we now have it on the fill. So we turned this stroked path into a filled path. So now we're kind of just filling up that inside instead of the outside. So now what we can do is put a stroke on this path, and that's going to give us those 2 strokes we need with the proper curvature, and we didn't have to go in and adjust any points by hand. So go ahead and select that stroke just to bring that to the front there. Then we'll come over here to our swatches, and let's choose kind of maybe an orange color for this. So I'm going to use that second orange color over. And then let's go ahead and just bump up this stroke weight about to what we had for the phone. So that looks like a 3. So I'll go ahead and bump this one up to a 3 as well. And you can see that now we're getting a nice stroke all the way around with that gap in between. But the gap is still being filled. So I'm going to go ahead and select my whole shape, bring that fill to the front and choose none, and that's going to just give me those 2 outlines that I need. So that looks great, and really all I have to do now is go back in and use my same scissor and deletion of points in the path, or really just cutting those points in the path process to get the corners the way I want them to look. But one other thing that I need to do before I start doing that is you'll notice that these 2 paths are still connected because they're the stroke for a compound path. So we want to go ahead and select both of those, right click and say release compound path. So that's a little bit different than ungrouping, but you can see that now those 2 are no longer connected and I can click on them individually. So let's go ahead and just go around the outside edge of this path with our scissors tool and click all of those little points. We'll just remember we started in the upper right hand corner. And we'll start just cutting all of these points apart, and then we'll be able to add those corners and shapes like we did on our phone, just to kind of keep the continuity of, the way that we're setting these frames up. So with the phone, we're not doing the double walled look just because I feel like it's going to look a little bit better not to have that, because it's just going to be too many details all right next to each other. Okay, so now that we've gotten all the way back around to the edge, we can see that that looks pretty good there. So now I want to go ahead and add my rounded corners to this. And a quick way for me to be able to select things as I'm working is just to go ahead and lock that inner shape that we created. So if you want to go over to your layers panel, and you see that path that has the red target next to it, just go ahead and lock that so we don't accidentally grab that. Now I can just select everything inside of that box, and this is going to remain locked and I won't be able to accidentally edit it. So we'll go ahead and select all of those pieces, come over here to our stroke panel, and we'll choose that rounded cap for the edge of that. And then we can zoom back in here and start kind of dragging these around until we're happy with the way that our gaps appear. Now, personally, I think this one actually might look better if we left it a corner. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring those back together. And I would actually prefer to cut this right here. So I'll grab my scissors tool again. We'll cut this piece and then just come back in there with the direct selection, pull that down a little bit. So now it's going to kind of have more of a corner right there, but then we've got our gap kind of up a little bit higher. So just kind of work with this. Use your best judgment for where those corners and gaps are going to be. And really the goal is just to keep continuity among the whole menu. So we just want this to look as good as it possibly can. And you'll notice I'm only changing the position of the straight pieces. If I start going in and trying to edit how these are moving, you'll notice it's going to destroy that curve. So I'm not going to play with that at all. And it looks like we need to clip this path right here too. If you forget one, that's easy to go in and change. Okay, so we'll go ahead, just grab this piece by itself, drag that back a little bit just to make it match with the rest of our pieces. And I'm just making my way around the whole folder just to finish off the way that that is looking, make it match everything else. And there's really not a super fast way to do this, and I'm leaving them leaving them strokes, because once we get those into After Effects later on to be animated, there is a really easy way to animate strokes like this if you want them to appear in a certain way. So sometimes you have a little bit more flexibility whenever you are working with a stroked path instead of a filled path, just as far as those animations go. So I'm just going to give those animators a little bit more flexibility in the way that they work with this by leaving them as strokes. And of course, sometimes using that outline stroke function that we used earlier when we went up here to path, outline stroke, that is tempting sometimes to use on projects like this because it's sometimes a little bit easier to work with fills instead of strokes just for scaling purposes. But I feel like we did a pretty good job without having to resort to turning the whole thing to outlines. Now let's go ahead really quickly and select all those corners, and we can just be careful not to select any of those larger outlines. And it's kind of hard to tell just because of the way that that bounding box works. So you may want to just kind of carefully go through and do them individually. And then let's go ahead and just bump up that stroke to a 5, just like what we used on these corner pieces over here. So that looks pretty good. If you need to go in maybe and just edit that spacing a little bit more, if you feel like it differs too much for you, then that's something that you might want to do. And I feel like one other color that I would like to work with in this project would be white. So I think I'm actually just going to turn all of these strokes to a white stroke, just by going to my swatches and choosing that there. So now this kind of has a white outline. We have a blue outline and an orange. And I think these are going to be the main 3 colors we work with throughout the rest of this course. Just kind of this blue, white, and orange look. Very nice contrast with the background and with each other as far as being those complementary colors. So in this lesson, we refined our technique for building shapes using paths and the stroke panel to make this folder shape.